Snowflakes drifted gently through the air, shimmering beneath the golden glow of New York's Christmas lights. The streets were alive with holiday cheer, families bundled in scarves and coats, couples laughing beneath strings of twinkling bulbs, children pointing excitedly at shop windows decorated with snowmen and reindeer. The black Range Rover pulled up near a quiet bus stop just a few blocks from the Rockefeller Christmas tree. Michael Carter stepped out first, tall and composed, his dark overcoat brushing against his crisp navy suit. He extended his hand, and a little girl with curls the color of sunlight jumped down into the fresh layer of snow. "Stay close, sweetheart," he said gently, adjusting her white knit hat. "We'll go see the big tree, then head home for Cocoa." "Okay, okay, Daddy," Kelly beamed, holding his hand tightly. The city felt magical that night. Christmas Eve always did. But Michael's eyes were distant, as if the lights of the season could never quite reach him. It had been 2 years since he lost his wife. And though he tried his best to smile for Kelly, the hole in his chest never fully closed. They walked slowly past the glowing storefronts, Kelly chattering about Santa and how many cookies they should leave by the fireplace. But suddenly, she stopped. Her voice fell to a whisper. "Daddy, why is that lady sleeping there?" Michael turned to where Kelly was pointing, the old wooden bench at the edge of the bus stop. There, curled up beneath the flickering bus route sign, was a young woman. She looked barely 20. Her blonde hair was messy, tangled with flakes of snow. She wore a pale, worn-out sweater that barely reached her elbows. In her trembling arms, she held something close to her chest. Michael stepped forward a little, squinting. It was a baby, wrapped in a thin, frayed blanket. The infant lay still, cheeks red from the biting cold, tiny fingers poking out and trembling slightly in the wind. Michael's heart tightened. He instinctively reached for Kelly's hand to keep walking. They were just strangers after all. The city was full of stories you could not fix. But Kelly pulled back. "Daddy," she said again more firmly this time, eyes wide. "She has a baby. He's so little. Daddy, he's cold." Michael looked down at his daughter. Her small face was earnest, concern written in every innocent feature. For a moment he hesitated, his breath visible in the frosty air, mind swirling between logic and emotion. 2 years ago, Sarah would have already been kneeling beside the bench, offering help without hesitation. His late wife had possessed that rare quality of immediate compassion, one that didn't calculate risk or convenience, one that simply saw need and responded. Kelly had inherited that same instinct, it seemed. Without a word, Michael slowly bent down and began to unwrap the soft red scarf from around Kelly's neck. She said nothing, just watched as her father stepped toward the sleeping woman. Kneeling beside the bench, Michael gently laid the scarf over the baby, careful not to startle either of them. The infant stirred slightly, lips moving in his sleep. Michael glanced up at the young woman. Her skin was pale, almost blue around the edges of her lips. Her arms clutched the child tighter, even in unconsciousness, as if instinctively guarding him. He reached out a hand and touched her shoulder lightly. "Miss," he said, voice low but urgent. "Miss, you can't stay out here tonight." She did not respond. Michael leaned closer, concern deepening. His voice broke just slightly. "Please wake up." The wind blew a little harder then, sending a chill through his spine. In the distance, a chorus of carolers could be faintly heard, singing Silent Night. And yet nothing about this moment felt silent. He turned back briefly and saw Kelly watching him, not with fear, but hope. A memory flashed across his mind. Sarah in the hospital, her hand weak in his, whispering, "Promise me you'll show her how to be kind, Michael. Promise me you'll teach her that matters more than anything." He turned back to the young woman, still kneeling, determination settling into his features. Grace Miller awoke in a jolt of panic. The cold hit her first, sharp and biting. Then came the fear. Her arms clutched the bundle against her chest, her baby. Her eyes flew open. Snow was falling heavier now. Her back ached from the frozen bench. But what startled her most was the tall man kneeling beside her, the scent of cologne and city air clinging to him. He was dressed in a tailored coat, leather gloves, and he was holding something in his arms. Her baby. "No," she gasped, lunging forward. "Give him back." The man didn't flinch. His voice was steady and low. "He's freezing. You need to come inside." She tried to stand, her legs trembling. "I don't need your pity." Michael Carter studied her. Young, barely 20, her blonde hair was tangled and crusted with frost. Her lips cracked, her sweater stretched thin, but it was her eyes that held him. Defiant, desperate, exhausted. The baby stirred weakly. Michael adjusted the scarf, his daughter's scarf, around the infant's small body. The child's skin was pale, his lips tinged blue. "I'm not offering pity," he said. "I'm offering warmth." Grace's eyes filled with tears, but she blinked them back. People only help when they want something. I've learned that the hard way. A gust of wind cut through them. The baby let out a weak, wheezing cough, then another. Michael stood holding the baby tighter. "You can come or not, but I'm not leaving him to freeze." For a moment, Grace didn't move. Her arms ached for her son. Every part of her screamed to grab him back, to run, but something in the man's eyes stopped her. They weren't cruel. They weren't suspicious. They were kind, kind like a father. She took a hesitant step. "His name is Noah," she whispered. Michael nodded. "I'm Michael. I have a hotel a few blocks from here. You can stay there tonight." She glanced at her soaked shoes, then back at her baby, swaddled in a scarf that wasn't his, held by a man she didn't know. But her feet moved. She followed. "A hotel?" Grace asked, her voice thin with suspicion. "What kind of hotel?" Michael looked over his shoulder as they walked toward the Range Rover where Kelly waited. "The kind I own," he said simply. "The Archer on 5th. My daughter and I will take you there, get you settled, make sure you and Noah have everything you need for tonight. No strings?" Grace stopped walking. "People always say that, no strings. But there are always strings." Michael turned to face her fully, snow gathering on his shoulders. "The only string," he said, "is that it's Christmas Eve, it's 20 degrees, and your son needs to be warm." "Nothing else," a small voice called from the Range Rover. "Daddy, is the baby coming with us?" Michael looked back at Kelly, then to Grace, his gaze steady. "That's up to his mother." Inside the Range Rover, the world felt surreal, warm, too quiet. Grace curled up in the back seat, watching every move as Michael adjusted Noah's blanket. A little girl peeked over the seat, watching her with wide-eyed, curious eyes. "She's so young," Grace murmured. "She's 4, Michael replied, catching her gaze in the mirror. "Her name's Kelly." Grace nodded. "She's beautiful." For a moment, silence settled. Then Kelly asked softly, "What's your baby's name?" "Noah," Grace said. Kelly smiled. "He's really tiny, like a snowflake." Michael's eyes flicked to the mirror again. Grace was staring out the window, but he saw the shimmer of tears she wouldn't let fall. The Archer Hotel rose before them, elegant and imposing, with its limestone facade and doormen in long coats. Grace's breath caught in her throat. She hadn't expected this. The gleaming brass revolving doors, the marble floors, the crystal chandeliers in the lobby. This wasn't just any hotel, this was luxury. The staff greeted Michael with deference. "Mr. Carter, welcome back, sir." Michael nodded, guiding Grace toward a private elevator, with his hand hovering near, but not touching, her back. "We need the Aspen suite prepared, James. Extra towels, warm meals sent up, and a bassinet if we have one. Right away, Mr. Carter." The elevator doors closed, and Grace felt her heart racing. She clutched Noah tighter. "Who are you?" she whispered. Michael looked down at Kelly, who was leaning against his leg, half asleep now. "Just someone who couldn't walk by," he said finally. The suite was warm and spacious, with plush furniture and windows overlooking the snowy city. Grace stood awkwardly in the center, afraid to touch anything, afraid this moment would dissolve. Michael set Kelly gently on a couch and covered her with his coat before turning to Grace. "The bedroom is through there," he said, pointing to a doorway. "There's a bathroom with a shower. Room service will bring food. Is there anything specific Noah needs?" Grace looked down at her son, who was finally warming, his cheeks regaining color. He needs formula and diapers." Michael nodded. "I'll have them sent up." "Why are you doing this?" Grace asked suddenly, her voice breaking. Michael was quiet for a moment, looking out at the snow. 2 years ago, my wife died giving birth to our second child. The baby didn't survive either." Grace's eyes widened slightly. "I'm not trying to replace them," Michael continued, "but I know what it means to be alone on Christmas Eve." Before Grace could respond, a knock came at the door. A hotel employee wheeled in a cart with covered dishes, baby supplies, and fresh towels. Once they were alone again, Michael gently lifted Kelly. "We'll let you rest," he said. "There's a phone by the bed if you need anything. Just dial 0. Grace felt panic rise in her chest. "You're leaving?" Michael nodded. "We live a few blocks away. You need space, privacy. We'll check on you tomorrow." For a moment, Grace wanted to beg him to stay, afraid of being alone, afraid this sanctuary would vanish. Instead, she straightened her shoulders. "Thank you," she managed. Michael paused at the door, Kelly sleepy against his shoulder. "Merry Christmas, Grace," he said softly. And then they were gone. Grace had once believed in fairy tales before it all fell apart. She had been a sophomore at a liberal arts college majoring in fine arts. She loved drawing, people, places, moments in between. Her professors praised her work. Then came the wow. The promises, the mistakes, the tests that turned positive. When she told him, he disappeared. When she told her family, strict, religious, unbending, they gave her an ultimatum. "You've brought shame into this house," her mother had said. "If you keep it, you leave." She left. No bois. No money, no support. Just a child she hadn't been ready for and yet couldn't abandon. She bounced between shelters, then the streets. Food went to Noah. Coats were wrapped around him. Every night was a fight to survive. Christmas Eve was just another night to get through. Until now. Standing in the elegant hotel bathroom, Grace stared at her reflection in the mirror. She barely recognized herself. Thin face, hollow cheeks, dark circles under her eyes. She looked older than her 20 years, worn down by months of survival. With trembling hands, she turned on the shower, letting the room fill with steam. For the first time in weeks, she set Noah down, placing him on a bed of towels just outside the shower door where she could see him. He slept peacefully now, his tiny chest rising and falling. The hot water felt like salvation, washing away the grime of the streets, the cold that had settled in her bones. She wept then, silently, letting the water mix with her tears, grateful that Noah couldn't see his mother break. After the shower, wrapped in a plush hotel robe, Grace sat on the edge of the bed, feeding Noah with the formula the hotel had provided. The warmth, the quiet, the safety. It felt dangerous to accept, dangerous to believe. When Noah finished eating, his eyes growing heavy again, Grace laid him in the center of the king-size bed, building a barrier of pillows around him. Then she curled beside him, one hand resting on his chest, afraid to fully fall asleep. But exhaustion won, and for the first time in months, Grace Miller slept deeply, without fear of what might come in the night. Christmas morning dawned clear and brilliant, sunlight reflecting off fresh snow. Grace woke disoriented, momentarily forgetting where she was. Then she felt the soft mattress beneath her, saw the elegant room around her, and remembered the man, Michael Carter, and his daughter with the golden curls. Noah stirred beside her, making small, hungry sounds. As she prepared his formula, a knock came at the door. Grace froze, suddenly aware of how vulnerable she was. She approached cautiously, peering through the peephole. A small face with blue eyes and blonde curls stared back, standing on tiptoes to reach the peephole. Grace opened the door slowly to find Kelly, clutching a gift bag with red tissue paper poking out the top. "Merry Christmas," Kelly announced. "I brought presents for Noah." Behind her stood a woman in her 60s, elegant and poised, with silver hair pulled into a neat bun. She wore a wool coat and a disapproving expression. "Miss Miller," the woman said stiffly. "I'm Mrs. Margaret Hill, the Carter's housekeeper." "I apologize for the intrusion." Miss Kelly insisted on delivering her gifts. Grace clutched her robe tighter, suddenly conscious of her appearance. It's okay," she said, stepping back to let them in. Kelly bounded into the room, heading straight for the bed where Noah lay. "Look how tiny his fingers are," she exclaimed in wonder. Mrs. Hill remained by the door, her sharp eyes taking in every detail of the suite, noting the untouched food trays from the night before, the baby supplies, Grace's worn clothes draped over a chair. "Mr. Carter asked me to check if you needed anything," she said, her tone formal, but not unkind. Grace felt herself shrinking under the woman's gaze. "We're fine," she said quickly. "Please thank him for everything. We'll be out of your way soon." Mrs. Hill's expression softened slightly. "There's no rush, Miss Miller. The suite is paid through the week." Grace's eyes widened. A week in this luxury would cost more than she had seen in months. I can't accept that, she said automatically. Mrs. Hill looked at her for a long moment. Pride is a luxury of those who have options, Miss Miller. Sometimes acceptance is the braver choice. Before Grace could respond, Kelly called from the bed. Can Noah come see our tree? It's really big and has lights that change colors. Mrs. Hill sighed. Miss Kelly, I'm sure Miss Miller and her baby have plans. Grace looked at the little girl's hopeful face, then back to Mrs. Hill. Actually, we don't have plans, she said softly. Kelly's face lit up. So you'll come? Mrs. Hill's mouth formed a thin line. That would be Mr. Carter's decision, she said. As if summoned by his name, another knock came at the door. Mrs. Hill opened it to reveal Michael, dressed casually in a sweater and jeans, so different from his formal appearance the night before. I thought I might find you two here, he said, with a small smile. First to Mrs. Hill, then to Kelly. His eyes finally settled on Grace. Merry Christmas, he said warmly. Grace suddenly felt painfully aware of her situation. Standing in a borrowed robe in a hotel room she couldn't afford, with a man whose kindness she couldn't understand. I'm sorry about this, Michael said, gesturing to Kelly and Mrs. Hill. Kelly was determined to deliver her gifts. Daddy, Grace nodded. Can they come see our tree, please? Michael looked at Grace, his expression gentle but questioning. That's entirely up to Grace, he said. All eyes turned to her. Grace felt the weight of the moment, of the choice. She could retreat, protect herself and Noah from further involvement, from the inevitable disappointment when this fairy tale ended. Or she could step forward, accept one more kindness, one more moment of warmth. She thought of the night ahead, alone in this beautiful room, and then the nights after that, back on the streets when the week was over. That would be nice, she heard herself say, if it's not too much trouble. Kelly clapped her hands in delight. Mrs. Hill's expression remained neutral, but her eyes held a warning that Grace understood perfectly. Don't get attached. Don't expect more. We live just a few blocks away, Michael said. Whenever you're ready. Grace looked down at her worn clothes, suddenly embarrassed. I don't have anything appropriate to wear. Michael seemed to understand her discomfort. The hotel boutique is open today, he said. Feel free to find something there. Just tell them to charge it to the Aspen Suite. I can't let you do that, Grace protested. Michael's expression was kind but firm. Consider it a Christmas gift for both of you. An hour later, Grace stood in the hotel lobby, wearing new jeans, a soft cream sweater, and a warm coat. Noah was bundled in a new snowsuit, tiny mittens covering his hands. The boutique attendant had helped her select everything, never once making her feel like charity. Michael and Kelly waited for her by the revolving doors, Kelly bouncing with excitement. Outside, the Range Rover idled at the curb, its engine a soft hum in the Christmas morning quiet. The ride was short but significant. Each block they traveled showed Grace a world she had once belonged to and lost. The world of comfort, of security, of belonging. When they pulled up to a luxury high-rise overlooking Central Park, Grace's breath caught. This is where you live? She asked, unable to hide her awe. Michael nodded, helping Kelly out of the car. For the past 5 years, yes. A doorman greeted them warmly. Merry Christmas, Mr. Carter. And Miss Kelly, Merry Christmas, Thomas. Kelly replied, reaching for Grace's hand as they entered the lobby. The elevator ride to the penthouse was smooth and silent. Grace felt as though she was floating upward, away from reality, into some dream she didn't dare believe. Noah stirred against her chest, his eyes opening to take in the strange new surroundings. When the elevator doors opened directly into the penthouse foyer, Grace froze. Warm light poured across polished hardwood floors. Floor-to-ceiling windows showcased a sweeping view of the snow-covered park and the city beyond. In the corner stood a towering Christmas tree, glowing with gold and red ornaments. It looked like a scene from a movie. Her breath caught. Michael stepped out carrying Noah. Kelly skipped ahead, calling, "Come on, this is our home." Grace hovered in the doorway, arms crossed tightly. She didn't step inside. Michael noticed. "You're safe here," he said gently. Something in his voice and the gentleness of his words broke through Grace's defenses. She stepped forward, into the warmth, into the light. The morning unfolded like a dream. Kelly showed Grace every ornament on the tree, explaining each one's history with the solemnness of a museum curator. Mrs. Hill prepared a Christmas breakfast of pancakes shaped like stars, crisp bacon, and fresh orange juice. Michael moved through it all with quiet grace, attentive but not hovering. After breakfast, they gathered in the living room where presents waited under the tree. "Santa came," Kelly exclaimed, eyes wide with wonder. Grace sat on the edge of a plush armchair, Noah sleeping peacefully in her arms, watching as Kelly tore through colorful packages. Each gift was met with genuine delight. Books, just a child-sized easel with paints. Grace's heart ached with a bittersweet mix of joy for Kelly and sorrow for what Noah might never have. As if reading her thoughts, Michael appeared beside her, holding a small wrapped package. "This is for Noah," he said softly, "and there is something for you too." Grace stared at the package, unable to speak. Her fingers trembled as she took it, carefully balancing Noah in one arm. Inside was a tiny silver rattle, elegant and simple. "It was Kelly's when she was a baby," Michael explained. "I thought Noah might like it." Grace felt tears threatening again, but she held them back. "Thank you," she managed. Michael nodded toward another package on a side table. "That one's yours if you'd like to open it." Curious, Grace rose and went to the table. The package was flat and rectangular, wrapped in simple silver paper. With care, she unwrapped it, revealing a leather-bound sketchbook and a set of professional drawing pencils. She looked up at Michael in surprise. "Kelly mentioned you were an art student," he explained. "I thought you might like to draw again." Grace ran her fingers over the smooth leather cover, the high-quality paper within. It had been so long since she'd held proper art supplies, so long since she'd allowed herself to create rather than simply survive. For the first time since entering the penthouse, she smiled, a real smile that reached her eyes. "Thank you," she said, and this time her voice was steady. The day continued with quiet moments, Kelly showing Grace her room, her toys, her books, Michael preparing hot chocolate with tiny marshmallows, Mrs. Hill moving efficiently through it all, her initial stiffness gradually softening as she watched Grace gently care for Noah, never asking for anything, expressing gratitude for every small kindness. As afternoon shadows lengthened across the snow-covered park, Grace found herself alone with Michael in the kitchen, while Kelly napped and Noah slept in a makeshift bassinet fashioned from a drawer and soft blankets. "You have a beautiful home," Grace said, breaking the comfortable silence. "And a beautiful family." Michael smiled, though it didn't quite reach his eyes. "Thank you. It's been just Kelly and me for 2 years now." Grace hesitated, then asked, "Your wife?" Michael nodded, looking out at the park. "Sarah. She died in childbirth. There were complications. We lost both her and the baby." "I'm so sorry," Grace whispered. Michael turned to her, his gaze direct but gentle. "And you? How did you end up on that bench?" Grace looked down at her hands, at the pencil she'd been holding from the set he'd given her. For a moment, she considered deflecting, offering the simplified version of her story, but something about his honesty, his willingness to share his own pain, made her brave. "I was a sophomore at Parsons, fine arts major. I had a scholarship. Then I got pregnant and everything fell apart." She told him everything: the boyfriend who vanished, the parents who chose their reputation over their daughter, the months of shelters and street corners, of protecting Noah at all costs. Michael listened without interruption, his face a study in compassion without pity. When she finished, he simply said, "You're incredibly brave, Grace." She shook her head. Brave would have been finding a way to make it work. Brave would have been not ending up on that bench. "No," Michael countered. "Brave is choosing your child over security. Brave is surviving when everything is against you. Brave is accepting help when it's offered, even when pride says not to." Their eyes met, and for a moment, understanding flowed between them. Two people who had lost different things but knew the same pain of having life upended in an instant. The moment was broken by Noah's cry from the living room. Grace moved immediately, her body attuned to her child's needs. Michael watched her go, something shifting in his expression. That evening, when the sky had darkened and the city lights twinkled against the night, Michael approached Grace as she stood by the windows, Noah sleeping against her shoulder. "I have a proposal," he said carefully. Grace tensed immediately, her defenses rising. Michael seemed to sense her reaction. Not that kind of proposal, he clarified. An offer. I own a guest house on my estate in Connecticut. It's private, fully furnished. You and Noah could stay there just until you get back on your feet. A month maybe? No obligations, no expectations. Grace stared at him, searching for the catch, the hidden motive. Why? She asked finally. Why would you do that for someone you just met? Michael was quiet for a moment, considering his answer. Before Sarah died, she made me promise something. She made me promise to teach Kelly that kindness matters more than anything. I haven't always kept that promise well. But when Kelly saw you and Noah last night, she reminded me of it. This isn't about charity, Grace. It's about keeping a promise. Grace looked down at Noah, at his peaceful face, at the tiny fingers curled against her shoulder. She thought of the weeks ahead, of returning to the shelters, of the cold, of the constant fear. 1 month, she said finally, and I want to work. I need to earn my keep. Michael nodded, respecting her terms. We can figure that out, he agreed. Later that night, as the Carter penthouse grew quiet, Grace stood in the guest bedroom where she and Noah would sleep before leaving for Connecticut the next day. The room was elegant and understated, with a view of the twinkling city. She laid Noah in the center of the bed, building another pillow fortress around him. Then she took out the sketchbook Michael had given her and, for the first time in months, began to draw. She sketched Noah first, capturing his delicate features, the curve of his cheek, the fan of his eyelashes. Then she drew Kelly, her exuberant curls and bright smile. Finally, almost without meaning to, she began to sketch Michael. His thoughtful eyes, the slight sadness that never quite left his expression, the gentleness of his hands when he held Noah. As she drew, something long dormant awakened within her. Not just the artist's eye for detail, but hope. Small and fragile, but unmistakably there. Hope that tomorrow might be better than yesterday. Hope that the path ahead, though uncertain, might lead somewhere other than back to that cold bench. She closed the sketchbook and placed it carefully on the nightstand. Then she curled around Noah, one hand resting protectively on his chest, and allowed herself to dream of possibilities she hadn't dared imagine just 24 hours before. The next morning came with fresh snow and new beginnings. Grace packed the few belongings they now had, the clothes from the hotel boutique, the sketchbook and pencils. Noah's new rattle. It wasn't much, but it was more than they'd had 2 days ago. Mrs. Hill appeared at her door, her expression softer than it had been the day before. The car will be ready in an hour, Miss Miller. I've prepared some breakfast for you in the kitchen. Thank you, Mrs. Hill, Grace replied. The older woman hesitated, then said, Mr. Carter is a good man, sometimes too good for his own welfare. He sees the best in people, even when they might not deserve it. Grace understood the warning behind the words. I don't intend to take advantage of his kindness, she said quietly. Mrs. Hill studied her for a moment. I believe you don't, she said finally, but intentions and outcomes aren't always the same thing. Before Grace could respond, Noah began to fuss. Mrs. Hill nodded once and left, her message delivered. In the kitchen, Grace found Michael already dressed in a casual sweater and jeans, helping Kelly with her breakfast. The sight was oddly domestic, oddly painful in its normality, a family moment she had never experienced with her own child. Michael looked up as she entered, his smile warm. Good morning. Did you sleep well? Grace nodded, settling Noah in her arms as she took a seat at the island. Better than I have in months, thank you. Breakfast was simple but delicious. Warm croissants, fresh fruit, steaming coffee. Kelly chattered about the guest house, explaining its features with the authority of someone who considered it her domain. There's a pond with ducks, and a big tree with a swing. And in summer there are flowers everywhere. Grace listened, trying to imagine this new temporary home, trying not to let her heart attach too firmly to the image. As they prepared to leave, Michael's phone rang. His expression shifted as he answered, professional and focused. Victor, he said, his voice taking on an edge Grace hadn't heard before. Yes, I understand the urgency. No, it can't wait until tomorrow. He covered the phone with his hand and looked apologetically at Grace and Kelly. I'm sorry, this is important. A business matter that can't wait. Mrs. Hill will take you both to Connecticut. I'll join you tomorrow. Grace felt a strange disappointment but nodded her understanding. Of course. Thank you again for everything. Michael knelt to hug Kelly goodbye, whispering something in her ear that made her giggle. Then he straightened, his eyes meeting Grace's. You're doing the right thing, he said softly. For both of you. Grace knew he meant accepting help, accepting this chance. She wanted to believe him, needed to believe him. As the elevator doors closed, separating them from Michael and the penthouse, Grace felt both relief and trepidation. The fairy tale wasn't ending yet, but reality was beginning to seep in around the edges. She clutched Noah closer, breathing in his sweet baby scent. Whatever came next, they would face it together. They always had. The drive to Connecticut stretched before them, taking Grace and Noah further from the city that had been both their prison and their home for so many months. Through the window of the Range Rover, Grace watched as urban landscapes gave way to suburbs, then to the rolling hills and bare winter trees of rural Connecticut. Kelly had fallen asleep beside her, worn out by the excitement of Christmas and the prospect of showing Grace and Noah their new temporary home. Mrs. Hill drove in silence, occasionally glancing in the rearview mirror, as if checking that Grace was still there, still real. The Carter estate appeared suddenly around a bend in the road, stone gates opening to a long tree-lined drive that wound up to a magnificent stone manor house. Grace's breath caught at the sight. This wasn't just wealth. This was generational prosperity, the kind she had only ever seen in films. Mrs. Hill didn't drive to the main house, however. She followed a smaller path that branched from the main drive, leading through a stand of bare maple trees to a clearing where a charming two-story cottage stood. It was smaller than the manor, but still substantial, a stone and timber structure with large windows and a wraparound porch. This is the guest house, Mrs. Hill explained, parking in front. It was originally the caretaker's cottage. Mr. Carter had it renovated a few years ago. Grace stepped out of the car, Noah bundled against her chest and stared at what would be their home for the next month. It was more beautiful than anything she could have imagined. Rustic but elegant, welcoming and solid. Kelly woke with the stopping of the car and immediately scrambled out, eager to be the tour guide. Come see, Grace. Come see inside. The interior was even more charming. An open floor plan with a large stone fireplace dominating one wall, comfortable furniture in soft neutrals, a kitchen with gleaming appliances. Upstairs were 2 bedrooms and a bathroom with a clawfoot tub. Everything spoke of thoughtful design, of creating a space that felt like home. Mrs. Hill moved efficiently through the rooms, turning on lights, adjusting thermostats, pointing out where things were stored. There's food in the refrigerator and pantry, she explained. Linens in the closet upstairs. The phone connects directly to the main house if you need anything. Grace stood in the center of the living room, overwhelmed. This place, this beautiful warm place, would be theirs for a whole month. A sanctuary, a reprieve. Thank you, she whispered. Mrs. Hill's expression softened slightly. Mr. Carter asked me to make sure you and the baby had everything you needed. Is there anything else? Grace looked around at the comfort, the security, the beauty. No, she said softly. This is more than enough. That evening, after Mrs. Hill and Kelly had returned to the main house, after Noah had been fed and bathed in the deep sink of the cottage kitchen, after darkness had fallen over the estate, Grace stood at the windows looking out at the night. The moon cast silver light across the snowy grounds, illuminating the bare branches of trees, the gentle slope of hills, the distant silhouette of the main house. It was peaceful in a way the city never was, quiet in a way that made her heart ache. She thought of Michael Carter, of his kindness, his gentle eyes, the sadness that seemed to live just beneath his smile. She thought of Kelly, bright and innocent, reaching for Noah with such natural affection. She thought of the path that had led her here, to this moment, to this place. A month, she reminded herself, just a month to rebuild, to plan, to find a way forward that didn't lead back to that cold bench. With Noah sleeping soundly in a proper crib for the first time in his life, Grace returned to her sketchbook. As pencil met paper, as lines formed into shapes, shapes into images, she felt something long dormant stirring within her. Not just the artist's skill, but the artist's hope. The belief that beauty could be created even from pain, that something meaningful could emerge from the broken pieces of a life. She drew until her eyes grew heavy, until the fire in the grate burned down to embers, until the moon had traveled halfway across the night sky. She drew the cottage, the trees, the moon on snow. She drew Noah sleeping peacefully, his tiny face relaxed in dreams. She drew hands, her own, weathered by months of hardship, Noah's, perfect and new, and from memory, Michael's, strong and gentle as they cradled her son. Finally, she drew herself, not as she was now, thin and wary, but as she might be, could be someday. Standing tall, Noah in her arms, facing forward into light. When she finally closed the sketchbook and made her way upstairs to bed, Grace felt something she hadn't felt in a very long time. The quiet certainty that tomorrow would come, and that it might bring something other than struggle. For the first time since Noah was born, Grace Miller fell asleep with hope. Grace Miller woke to sunlight streaming through unfamiliar windows. For a moment, panic seized her. Where was she? Where was Noah? Then reality returned. The cottage, the Carters, the unexpected sanctuary that had appeared when she needed it most. She listened for Noah and heard his soft morning sounds from the crib nearby. Her son was awake but content, exploring his tiny hands in the gentle morning light. The cottage looked different in daylight, warmer somehow, more real. The polished wood floors gleamed, the stone fireplace stood solid and reassuring, and through the windows she could see the snow-covered grounds of the Carter estate stretching toward distant trees. This place existed outside the harsh world she'd known, like stepping into a painting of how life could be. Grace patted across to Noah, lifting him into her arms, breathing in his sweet scent. "Good morning, little one," she whispered against his downy head. "What do you think of our new temporary home?" Noah's response was a gurgle and a wave of his tiny fist. Grace smiled, a real smile that felt strange on her face after so many months of carefully maintained stoicism. Downstairs, Grace found the kitchen fully stocked, as Mrs. Hill had promised. Fresh milk, eggs, bread, fruit, coffee. She prepared breakfast with Noah balanced on her hip, marveling at the simple luxury of having food readily available, of not having to calculate every morsel, of being able to eat until she was satisfied. As she ate, Noah content in her lap, Grace's mind turned to Michael's offer from yesterday. 1 month in this cottage, 1 month to rebuild, 1 month to find her way forward. But he had also agreed that she should work, should earn her keep. Grace's pride demanded that she couldn't simply accept charity, even from someone as kind as Michael Carter. A knock at the door interrupted her thoughts. She opened it to find Kelly bouncing on the porch, bundled in a pink snowsuit, Mrs. Hill standing behind her with a resigned expression. "Can Grace come play in the snow?" Kelly asked Mrs. Hill for the dozenth time. "That's up to Miss Miller," Mrs. Hill replied, her tone softening slightly when she saw Grace with Noah in her arms. "Good morning, I trust you slept well?" Grace nodded, stepping back to invite them in from the cold. "Very well, thank you. Everything is perfect." Mrs. Hill's lips thinned in what might have been a smile. "Mr. Carter called this morning. His business in the city is taking longer than expected. He asked me to ensure you're settling in." Kelly tugged at Grace's sweater. "Can we show Noah the pond? It's frozen over and looks like magic." Grace looked down at the eager child, then at Mrs. Hill, uncertain of the protocol. Mrs. Hill seemed to understand her hesitation. "The estate is quite safe, Miss Miller. You're welcome to explore the grounds. Just stay within sight of either house." Grace felt a strange mix of relief and disappointment at the news of Michael's delayed arrival. Relief because his presence unsettled her in ways she wasn't ready to examine. And disappointment because what? Because she wanted to thank him again? Because Kelly clearly missed her father? Because the cottage, for all its charm, felt somehow incomplete without him? "Let me bundle Noah up," she told Kelly. "Then we can go see your magical pond." The morning unfolded in a series of small, perfect moments that Grace tucked away in her memory like treasures. Kelly leading her through snowy paths, explaining the estate's geography with a child's absolute authority. Noah's wide eyes taking in the bright winter world. The frozen pond, silvery and still, beneath bare willow branches. Kelly's delight when a family of deer appeared at the forest's edge, watching them curiously before bounding away. For a few hours, Grace allowed herself to forget the streets, forget the shelters, forget the uncertainty that waited beyond this month-long reprieve. She let herself be simply a young woman enjoying a winter morning with two children, one hers by birth, one hers for the moment, through some strange twist of fate. When they returned to the cottage, cheeks flushed with cold, Mrs. Hill had prepared lunch, warm soup and fresh bread that filled the small house with comforting aromas. To Grace's surprise, the older woman joined them at the table, her usual formalities softening just slightly. "You have a way with Miss Kelly," Mrs. Hill observed, watching as the child carefully fed herself without spilling. "She's not usually so composed." Grace smiled, adjusting Noah in her arms as she fed him his bottle. "She's a wonderful girl, very thoughtful." Mrs. Hill nodded, something unreadable crossing her expression. "She's had a difficult time since her mother passed. Mr. Carter has done his best, but—" The sentence hung unfinished, but Grace understood. The absence of a mother left a particular kind of hole, one that even the most devoted father couldn't quite fill. After lunch, Kelly reluctantly returned to the main house with Mrs. Hill for her afternoon nap. Grace stood on the porch watching them go, feeling an unexpected emptiness once they disappeared from view. The cottage seemed suddenly quiet, almost too quiet. With Noah settled for his own nap, Grace took out her sketchbook and began to draw. The images flowed more freely now. The pond, the deer, Kelly's bright face as she pointed out a cardinal against the snow. Her fingers remembered their old skill. Her eyes found the details that made each scene unique. For the first time in months, Grace lost herself in creation rather than survival. Later that afternoon, a different knock came at the door, firmer, more authoritative. Grace opened it to find a man in a crisp suit standing on the porch, his expression coolly professional. "Miss Miller, I'm Jason Evans, Mr. Carter's assistant. He asked me to deliver these to you." He held out a sleek laptop and a folder of papers. Grace took them hesitantly. "Thank you, but I'm not sure I understand. Mr. Carter mentioned you were interested in working during your stay. He thought these might help." The folder contains information about remote positions with Carter Investments, administrative support, data entry, basic graphic design, jobs that could be done from here. The computer is for your use if you decide to pursue any of them. Grace stared at the items in her hands, a complex emotion rising in her chest. This wasn't charity. This was opportunity, a chance to work, to contribute, to rebuild her independence without leaving Noah or this safe haven. "That's very thoughtful of him," she managed. Jason nodded, his professional demeanor softening slightly. "Mr. Carter also asked me to inform you that he should return tomorrow afternoon. Is there anything you need in the meantime?" Grace shook her head, still processing this new development. "No, thank you. We have everything we need." After Jason left, Grace settled on the couch with a laptop and folder. The positions were real, legitimate remote work that matched her skills. The pay was fair, perhaps even generous, and each job description noted flexible hours, understanding that her primary responsibility was to her child. Grace felt tears prick at her eyes. Michael Carter had found a way to honor her pride while still offering help. He'd created a path that allowed her dignity alongside support. The kindness of it, the thoughtfulness, touched something deep within her that she'd thought long frozen by months of hardship. That evening, after feeding Noah and settling him in his crib, Grace sent an email applying for the graphic design position. It was the most aligned with her education, with the artist she'd once been, with the woman she hoped to become again. Then she returned to her sketchbook, drawing until her eyes grew heavy, filling page after page with images of the day, with the first tentative visions of a future that might hold more than mere survival. The next morning dawned clear and cold. Grace woke early, a nervous energy propelling her through the morning routine with Noah. She cleaned the already clean cottage, arranged and rearranged the few belongings they had, checked her email repeatedly for a response to her application. The thought of Michael's return filled her with an anticipation she couldn't quite name. Around noon, Kelly appeared at the door, her smile wide and excited. "Daddy's home," she announced. "He wants to know if you'll come for dinner at the big house tonight." Grace felt her heart skip. From surprise, she told herself, nothing more. "That would be lovely," she replied, trying to keep her voice casual for Kelly's sake. "What time should we come?" 6 o'clock, Kelly declared. "And Daddy says to bring your drawings. He wants to see them." After Kelly left, Grace stood in the cottage living room, suddenly aware of her limited wardrobe, of her unstyled hair, of all the ways she was unprepared for dinner at the big house. The insecurity was familiar and unwelcome, a reminder of the gulf between her current circumstances and the world the Carters inhabited so naturally. She pushed the feeling aside. This wasn't about impressing anyone. This was simply dinner with the man who had helped her, whose home she was temporarily sharing. Nothing more. Still, when she dressed that evening, she took extra care, styling her hair, applying the minimal makeup that had come with her purchases from the hotel boutique, selecting the nicest outfit from her small collection. Noah, too, was carefully dressed in the softest of his new clothes, his fine hair gently combed. At precisely 6 o'clock, Grace stood at the massive front door of the main house, Noah in her arms, sketchbook tucked under one arm. Before she could knock, the door swung open to reveal Michael Carter. He looked different here in this setting, more relaxed than he had in the city, dressed in a simple sweater and dark jeans, his hair slightly tousled. But his eyes were the same, kind, thoughtful, with that ever-present shadow of sadness. Grace, he greeted her warmly, and Noah, welcome. Please come in. The main house was even more impressive inside. Soaring ceilings, elegant furnishings, artwork that Grace immediately recognized as museum quality. Yet for all its grandeur, it felt surprisingly welcoming. Lived in a home rather than a showcase. Kelly came running from somewhere deeper in the house, launching herself at her father's legs before turning her bright smile to Grace. "You came," she exclaimed, as if there had been any doubt. "Come see the dining room. We have candles and everything." Michael's smile as he watched his daughter was full of gentle amusement and love. "She's been preparing for this dinner all day," he confided to Grace as they followed the excited child. "I think we have enough candles lit to be visible from space." The dining room was indeed awash in candlelight, tapers and silver holders, votives clustered in the center of the table, the effect both elegant and whimsical. Mrs. Hill moved efficiently around the space, making final adjustments to what appeared to be an elaborate meal. "I hope you like roast chicken," Michael said as he pulled out a chair for Grace. "It's Kelly's favorite." "It looks wonderful," Grace replied, settling Noah on her lap. "Everything does." Dinner unfolded with surprising ease, conversation flowing naturally, Kelly providing much of the entertainment with stories of her adventures showing Grace and Noah around the estate. Michael listened attentively to his daughter, his affection for her evident in every glance, every gentle correction, every shared smile. Grace watched their interaction, feeling both warmed by it and achingly aware of what Noah might never have. A father who looked at him with such love, who built his world around his child's happiness. After the main course, as Mrs. Hill cleared plates, Michael turned to Grace. "Kelly mentioned you've been drawing again." Grace felt suddenly self-conscious, aware of the modest sketchbook beside her chair. "Just a little. It helps pass the time." "May I see?" Michael asked, his tone genuinely interested. Grace hesitated, then nodded, passing him the sketchbook. She watched his face as he turned the pages, studying each drawing with careful attention. His expression shifted subtly, surprise, then appreciation, then something deeper she couldn't quite name. "These are extraordinary, Grace," he said finally, looking up to meet her eyes. "Truly, you have remarkable talent." The compliment warmed her more than it should have. "I was studying fine arts before everything changed," she explained. Michael nodded, turning to another page. A sketch of Kelly at the frozen pond, her expression captured perfectly, the joy and wonder of childhood distilled in a few careful lines. "What would you have done if things had been different?" The question caught Grace by surprise. It had been so long since anyone had asked about her dreams, her ambitions, the person she'd been before becoming simply Noah's mother, simply a survivor. "I wanted to be an illustrator," she admitted. "Children's books, maybe, or magazines. I loved capturing moments, telling stories through images." Michael studied another drawing, this one of Noah sleeping, his tiny face peaceful, vulnerable. "You still could," he said quietly. Grace smiled, a hint of her old bitterness surfacing. Single mothers without degrees or portfolios aren't exactly in high demand in the art world. Michael looked up, meeting her eyes directly. "You have a degree, just not a completed one." You have talent, extraordinary talent. And you have time, Grace. A month here to build a portfolio, to apply to finish your degree, to find your path back." His words held such certainty, such conviction, that for a moment Grace allowed herself to believe them, to imagine that future, her and Noah, stable, secure, her creating art that mattered, him growing up proud of his mother, rather than ashamed of their circumstances. Before she could respond, Kelly tugged at Michael's sleeve. "Can we have dessert now, Daddy? I helped make it." The moment broke, the conversation shifting to lighter topics. But Grace felt something settle within her, a seed of possibility taking root. Later, as they moved to the living room for coffee, Michael's phone rang. His expression changed as he glanced at the screen. A subtle hardening, a shift from the relaxed host to something more guarded. "Excuse me," he said. "I need to take this." He stepped away, his voice too low for Grace to hear. But his body language spoke volumes. Tension in his shoulders, a slight pacing motion, the occasional sharp gesture of his free hand. Kelly, seemingly unperturbed by her father's sudden shift in mood, showed Grace her collection of stuffed animals, each with its own elaborate backstory. Grace listened attentively, but part of her attention remained on Michael, on the frown that deepened as his call continued. When he returned, his smile seemed forced. "I apologize for the interruption. Business doesn't always respect personal time." Grace nodded, understanding more than he might realize. Before Noah, before homelessness, she'd had ambitions too, goals, a future mapped out that had nothing to do with survival and everything to do with dreams. "Is everything all right?" she asked quietly while Kelly was distracted with her toys. Michael hesitated, then sighed. "Just a persistent problem. Nothing you need to worry about." But the shadow had deepened in his eyes, and Grace wondered what burden he carried beyond the grief she already knew about. The evening ended with Michael walking Grace and Noah back to the cottage, Kelly having been put to bed by Mrs. Hill. The night was clear and cold, stars sharp against the black sky, their breath visible in the frosty air. "Thank you for dinner," Grace said as they approached the cottage, "and for the job opportunity. I sent in my application yesterday." Michael smiled, a genuine smile that lightened his features. "Jason mentioned that. He was impressed with your qualifications. You should hear back tomorrow." They stood for a moment on the cottage porch, an awkward silence falling between them. Noah had fallen asleep against Grace's shoulder, his gentle breathing the only sound. Michael cleared his throat. "I meant what I said earlier, Grace, about your talent, your potential. Sometimes life takes unexpected turns, but that doesn't mean the path is closed permanently." Grace looked up at him, this stranger who had become something else. Not quite a friend, not quite an employer, something undefined that made her both comfortable and uneasy. "Why are you really doing all this?" she asked suddenly, the question that had lingered since that first night. The truth this time. Michael was silent for a long moment, his eyes looking past her to some middle distance. "When Sarah died," he began finally, "I was lost, functioning but not living, going through motions for Kelly's sake but hollow inside. Then Christmas Eve, I saw you and Noah, and..." He paused, gathering his thoughts. It wasn't pity, Grace, it was recognition of someone else who had lost their path, who was fighting to survive, to protect what mattered most. And for the first time since Sarah, I felt something other than numbness. I felt like I could help, could make a difference. It was selfish in a way. Helping you and Noah helped me remember who I wanted to be. The honesty of his answer caught Grace off guard. She had expected platitudes, expected generosity framed as virtue. This admission of mutual need, of finding purpose in their chance encounter, it felt more genuine, more human than any explanation she'd imagined. "Well," she said softly, "I think we're helping each other then." Michael's smile reached his eyes this time. "I think we are." As he turned to leave, he added, "Oh, and Grace, congratulations on the job. Jason was going to call you tomorrow, but I think you deserve to know tonight. You start Monday, if that works for you." Grace felt a surge of emotion, pride, relief, gratitude. "Thank you, Michael, for everything." He nodded once, then disappeared into the darkness, the sound of his footsteps crunching on snow fading gradually. Inside the cottage, Grace laid Noah in his crib, then stood at the window watching the distant lights of the main house, thinking of the man who lived there. Michael Carter was becoming something dangerous to her. Not a threat, but a possibility. A possibility of what she wasn't yet ready to examine. The days that followed fell into a gentle rhythm. Mornings with Noah, exploring the grounds when weather permitted. Afternoons working remotely, designing simple graphics for Carter Investments' internal communications while Noah napped. Evenings drawing, reading, planning tentatively for a future beyond the months she'd been promised. Kelly visited daily, sometimes with Mrs. Hill, occasionally with Michael when his work permitted. The little girl had formed a powerful attachment to both Grace and Noah, playing peekaboo with the baby, watching with fascination as Grace drew, chattering endlessly about school and friends, and the adventures she planned for when spring came. Grace found herself looking forward to these visits, particularly when Michael joined them. He carried a quiet strength, an understated kindness that created a sense of safety she hadn't known in a very long time. Their conversations ranged from art to books to gentle debates about films, normal, ordinary exchanges that felt extraordinary to Grace after months of having no one to talk to but Noah. But beneath this peaceful surface, Grace sensed tension. Michael's phone calls became more frequent, his expressions more troubled when he thought no one was watching. Twice he canceled plans with Kelly due to urgent business matters, leaving the child disappointed and confused. Whatever burden he carried seemed to be growing heavier. 2 weeks into their stay, Grace was working at the cottage dining table when a black town car pulled up outside. A man emerged, tall, impeccably dressed in a suit that even Grace could tell cost more than everything she'd ever owned combined. His silver hair contrasted with a deeply tanned face, his expression cold and assessing as he studied the cottage. Grace felt a chill that had nothing to do with the winter air. She watched through the window as the man approached, his confident stride speaking of someone accustomed to power, to getting his way. When the knock came, sharp and demanding, she gathered Noah from his playmat and held him close before answering. "Can I help you?" she asked through the barely opened door. The man's smile didn't reach his eyes. "Miss Miller, I presume?" "Victor Reynolds. I believe you're acquainted with my competitor, Michael Carter." Grace's guard rose immediately. Nothing about this man's presence felt benign. "Carter isn't here right now," she said, beginning to close the door. Reynolds stopped it with one hand, not forcefully, but with clear intent. "I'm not here to see Michael, Miss Miller. I'm here to see you." Grace felt her heart rate increase, her arms tightening instinctively around Noah. "What do you want?" Reynolds' smile widened slightly. "To make you an offer." "May I come in?" "No," Grace said firmly. "Whatever you have to say, you can say it here." Reynolds seemed amused by her defiance. "Direct. I appreciate that." "Very well. I know your situation, Miss Miller. Former art student, homeless until Michael played White Knight on Christmas Eve. Currently working as what? A glorified clip art designer for Carter Investments?" Grace said nothing, her expression carefully neutral. "I'm prepared to offer you a more substantial position," Reynolds continued. "Real work with my company, better pay, benefits for you and your child, an apartment in the city, all yours immediately." "Why would you do that?" Grace asked, her voice steady despite her racing thoughts. Reynolds' expression hardened slightly. "Let's be frank. Michael Carter is distracted, his board is concerned, his newest charity case living on his property, rumors of impropriety. It's affecting investor confidence. My offer solves problems for everyone. You get stability, independence. Michael gets back his focus and reputation. I get, well, let's just say business advantages present themselves when opponents are distracted." Grace felt sick, her skin crawling at the implication at being reduced to a charity case, a distraction. "I'm not interested," she said coldly. Reynolds raised an eyebrow. "Are you sure? Think carefully, Miss Miller. 1 month from now, where will you be? Back on that bench? This is a limited-time offer for a real future, for you and your son." Grace straightened, finding a strength she'd forgotten she possessed. "Reynolds, I may not have much, but I have my integrity. Please leave." Reynolds' amused expression vanished, replaced by something harder, colder. "Integrity doesn't keep a child fed, Miss Miller. Neither does foolish loyalty to a man who sees you as a project, not a person. My card, should you reconsider." He placed a business card on the railing and walked away, not looking back as he returned to his waiting car. Grace closed the door with shaking hands, holding Noah close as she watched through the window until Reynolds' car disappeared down the drive. Only then did she allow herself to sink onto the couch, her mind racing. Who was this man? What was his connection to Michael? And more troublingly, how had he known about her background, about the precise nature of her situation? She glanced at the clock. Michael had mentioned stopping by around 4 to discuss a new project he wanted her input on. Should she tell him about Reynolds' visit? Or would that only add to the burden he already carried, the tension she'd observed growing daily? In the end, the decision was made for her. When Michael arrived, one look at her face told him something was wrong. "What happened?" he asked immediately. The concern in his voice, genuine and immediate, made her decision for her. She told him everything. Reynolds' visit, his offer, his veiled threats, his implications about Michael's reputation, about her being a distraction. Michael's expression darkened as she spoke, his jaw tightening, his normally gentle eyes hardening with anger. When she finished, he was silent for a long moment. "I'm sorry, Grace," he said finally. "Victor Reynolds is a problem I should have anticipated. I didn't think he'd go this far." "Who is he?" Grace asked. Michael sighed, running a hand through his hair. "My chief competitor. We've been in a business battle for years. Recently, he's been trying to orchestrate a hostile takeover of Carter Investments. It's been consuming a lot of my attention. And I'm making it worse," Grace realized aloud. "Being here, working for you, it's creating rumors, affecting your reputation." Michael's expression softened. "You're not the problem, Grace. Reynolds is. He's exploiting societal assumptions, trying to use you as leverage. It's manipulative and despicable, and I won't let him succeed." "But he was right about one thing," Grace said quietly. "In 2 more weeks, Noah and I will need to leave." "And then what?" The question hung in the air between them, weighty with implications neither was ready to address. "We'll figure it out," Michael promised. "Together. Don't let Reynolds get into your head. That's exactly what he wants." Later that evening, after Michael had returned to the main house, Grace sat by the fire, Noah sleeping peacefully in his crib upstairs. She thought about Reynolds' offer, the security it promised, the independence. She thought about Michael, his kindness, his growing troubles, the complications her presence was creating in his life. The rational choice seemed clear. Accept Reynolds' offer, remove herself as a distraction in Michael's life, secure a future for Noah that didn't depend on temporary charity. But something deeper, something more instinctive, rebelled at the thought. Victor Reynolds had looked at her and seen a pawn, a tool to be used against Michael. He hadn't seen Grace the artist, Grace the mother, Grace the survivor. He had seen only what she could be worth to him in his game of corporate chess. Michael had seen her. From that first moment on the bench, he had seen her humanity, her struggle, her strength. He had offered help without diminishment, opportunity without exploitation. Whatever complications existed between them now, that fundamental recognition of her personhood remained sacred. Grace opened her sketchbook, turning to a blank page. She began to draw, not the estate, not Noah, not the past or possible futures. She drew Michael as she had seen him earlier that day, righteous anger in defense of her dignity, determination to protect her from Reynolds' manipulation, absolute certainty that she was worth defending. The drawing took shape beneath her fingers, strength and vulnerability perfectly balanced, the complexity of a man carrying burdens she was only beginning to understand. When she finished, Grace studied the image, suddenly aware of what it revealed, not just about Michael, but about herself, about the feelings that had been growing, quietly but persistently, since that Christmas Eve when their lives had intersected. She closed the sketchbook quickly, as if shutting away a truth she wasn't ready to face. But the knowledge remained, hovering at the edges of her consciousness, impossible to fully ignore. Grace Miller was falling in love with Michael Carter, and nothing could be more dangerous to the fragile security she had found. The next morning brought heavy snow and a call from Mrs. Hill. Michael had been called back to the city unexpectedly. An emergency board meeting, something to do with Reynolds' latest maneuver. He would be gone for at least 2 days. The news should have brought relief, time to sort through her confused feelings, to rebuild her emotional defenses. Instead, Grace felt a hollow disappointment that she couldn't justify even to herself. Kelly, deprived of her father's company and school due to the snowstorm, appeared at the cottage shortly after breakfast, hopeful for companionship. Grace welcomed her, grateful for the distraction from her thoughts. They spent the morning baking cookies, making snow angels outside the cottage, reading stories by the fire. Kelly's bright presence filled the cottage with laughter, with normalcy, with the simple joy of childhood that Grace had feared Noah might never experience. After lunch, while Noah and Kelly both napped, the little girl curled on the couch under a blanket, the baby in his crib upstairs, Grace checked her work email. There was a message from Jason, Michael's assistant, with a new project attached: designs for the annual Carter Foundation Charity Gala to be held in 3 weeks. Grace opened the attached brief, reading through the requirements. It was a significant project, far beyond the simple internal graphics she'd been creating. This was public-facing work, high profile, with her name attached as designer. The kind of project that could form the cornerstone of a professional portfolio. A note at the bottom of the brief caught her attention. Mr. Carter specifically requested your involvement in this project, citing your exceptional artistic sensibility. Grace stared at these words, a complex emotion rising in her chest. This wasn't charity work thrown her way out of pity. This was recognition of her skills, her talents, her value beyond her circumstances. She began sketching immediately, ideas flowing faster than she could capture them. The gala's theme was new beginnings, a celebration of second chances, of renewal, of hope rising from adversity. It resonated deeply with Grace, with her own journey, with the unexpected turn her life had taken since Christmas Eve. She was so absorbed in her work that she barely registered the sound of a car in the driveway. Only when a sharp knock came at the door did she look up, startled. Setting aside her sketchbook, she moved to answer, expecting perhaps Mrs. Hill checking on them. Instead, she found a woman, elegant, expensively dressed, with a perfectly coiffed blonde bob and calculating eyes. Beside her stood a man with a professional camera, his expression bored but attentive. Grace felt her stomach drop. Something about the woman's smile, predatory, triumphant, sent warning signals racing through her mind. "Grace Miller?" the woman asked, though her tone suggested she already knew the answer. "Vanessa Winters, New York social scene. I was hoping for a quick interview about your arrangement with Michael Carter." Grace began to close the door, but the woman's next words stopped her. "I should mention we already have photos of you and the Carter child. Quite cozy making cookies this morning, were you? Playing happy families?" Grace felt a cold fear grip her chest. "Kelly, they had photographs of Kelly. You need to leave," Grace said, her voice low but firm. Now the woman's smile widened. "Or what? You'll call security? The police? And tell them what? That journalists are investigating why a homeless woman and her baby are living on Michael Carter's estate. That would make an even better story, don't you think?" Behind Grace, a small voice called out sleepily, "Grace, who's at the door?" Kelly had woken from her nap, was padding toward the door in sock feet, rubbing her eyes. The photographer immediately raised his camera. Something protective and fierce rose in Grace. She stepped outside, pulling the door closed behind her, positioning herself between the strangers and the cottage where both children slept. "You will not photograph that child," she said, her voice steady with a strength she'd forgotten she possessed. "You will not exploit her for whatever story you're trying to create." The woman's smile faltered slightly in the face of Grace's unexpected ferocity. "The public has a right to know what's happening here," she countered. "Michael Carter, grieving widower, takes in homeless young blonde woman who bears a striking resemblance to his late wife. It writes itself, really." Grace felt as though she'd been slapped. The comparison to Sarah, the implication of impropriety, the reduction of Michael's kindness to something tawdry, it sickened her. "Mr. Carter offered shelter to a homeless mother and child on Christmas Eve," Grace said coldly. "There's your story. Now leave before I call the police for trespassing and harassment of a minor." The photographer lowered his camera slightly, looking uncertain, but the woman pressed on. "Reynolds Investments is very interested in the impact your presence is having on Carter's business decisions. They've offered quite a substantial fee for an exclusive." And there it was, the connection to Victor Reynolds, the manipulation laid bare. "Get off this property," Grace said, her voice like steel. "Now." Perhaps sensing she would get nothing useful. The woman shrugged. "We have what we need anyway. Look for the article next week. Carter's Christmas charity case. Compassion or calculated distraction." Catchy, don't you think? They turned to leave, the woman's heels clicking on the frozen driveway as they returned to their car. Grace watched until they drove away, her heart pounding, her mind racing. When she returned inside, Kelly was sitting on the couch, confusion on her small face. "Who were those people, Grace?" "Just lost travelers looking for directions?" Grace lied, hating the deception but unwilling to frighten the child. "Let's check on Noah, shall we? Then maybe we can finish our cookies." That evening, after Mrs. Hill had collected Kelly for dinner at the main house, Grace paced the cottage living room, Noah watching from his playmat. She needed to tell Michael about the reporters, about the threatened article, about Reynolds' apparent connection to the press invasion. But calling him during his emergency board meeting seemed irresponsible, potentially damaging. She was still deliberating when her phone rang, Michael's number flashing on the screen. Grace, his voice was tight with controlled anger. "I just received a call from Vanessa Winters seeking comment on our relationship." "What happened?" Grace told him everything. The unexpected visit, the photographer, the threats, the mention of Reynolds, her fierce protection of Kelly from their cameras. Michael was silent for a long moment after she finished. "I'm coming back tonight," he said finally. "This has gone too far." "No," Grace countered. "That's exactly what they want. To disrupt your business meetings, to make you appear distracted, irresponsible. Handle what you need to in the city. Kelly is safe with Mrs. Hill. Noah and I are fine." Another silence, then. "You're remarkable, Grace Miller. Do you know that?" The warmth in his voice, even through the phone, made her heart skip. "I'm a survivor," she replied simply. "I've faced worse than tabloid journalists." Michael sighed. "This is my fault. I should have anticipated Reynolds would stoop this low. I'm sorry you and Noah have been dragged into my business problems." Grace thought of Reynolds' visit, of his offer, of the simplest solution to Michael's troubles. Maybe Noah and I should accept Reynolds' offer," she said quietly. "Remove ourselves as a distraction. Make things simpler for you." "Absolutely not," Michael's response was immediate, vehement. "That's exactly what he wants. Grace, please promise me you won't contact him." The intensity of his reaction surprised her. "I promise," she said. "But Michael, we need to be realistic. In less than 2 weeks, our month here ends. Noah and I need a plan, and you need your life back, your reputation intact." When he spoke again, his voice was softer, almost vulnerable. "What if I don't want my life back? What if these past weeks, with you and Noah here, with Kelly happier than she's been in years? What if this feels more right than anything has since Sarah died?" The words hung between them, heavy with implication. Grace's breath caught, her hand tightening on the phone. "Michael," she began, unsure what would follow. He cut her off gently. "We don't need to figure everything out tonight. Just don't make any decisions until I get back." "Please, okay," she agreed. "Be careful, Michael." After they hung up, Grace stood at the window, watching snow begin to fall again, thick and silent in the gathering darkness. Michael's words echoed in her mind, stirring possibilities she hadn't dared consider. Possibilities both thrilling and terrifying in their potential. Whatever path forward they found, one thing was becoming increasingly clear. It wouldn't be simple. Reynolds, the press, the board, the complicated emotions growing between them, all formed obstacles to any future that might include both their families. Yet as she watched the snow transform the landscape, covering the old with clean, perfect white, Grace felt a fragile hope take root. New beginnings were possible. She had already come so far from that cold bench on Christmas Eve. Perhaps the journey wasn't over yet. Later that night, as Grace sketched designs for the charity gala, her phone chimed with an email notification. The sender was unfamiliar, but the subject line made her blood run cold. "Preliminary copy for review. Carter's Christmas charity case." With trembling fingers, she opened the email to find the draft article Vanessa Winters planned to publish, sent anonymously from what appeared to be a staff account at the magazine. The content was even worse than Grace had feared. Innuendos about her relationship with Michael, speculation about her resemblance to his late wife, questions about his judgment, his stability, his fitness to lead his company. Accompanying the text were photographs. Grace and Kelly making cookies, viewed through the cottage window. Grace standing protectively on the porch. And most disturbing, a much older photo that must have been taken during her time on the streets, showing her and Noah huddled on the bench where Michael had found them. Grace felt physically ill, violated by the invasion of privacy, by the manipulation of innocent moments into something tawdry, by the exploitation of her past struggles. But beneath the initial shock grew something else: determination. A fierce resolve not to be used as a weapon against the man who had shown her nothing but kindness. She forwarded the email to Michael with a simple note. "I think someone at the magazine doesn't agree with this article. Thought you should see it." His response came within minutes. "My lawyers will handle this. I'm coming home first thing tomorrow." "Grace, none of this is your fault. Remember that." Grace set her phone aside and returned to her sketching, but her mind was elsewhere. On Michael, on the battle he was fighting, on her unwitting role in it all, on the feelings that had grown between them, complicated now by external threats, by public scrutiny. Whatever came next, she knew one thing with certainty. She would not be Victor Reynolds's pawn. She would not allow her story, her struggles, her relationship with the Carters to be weaponized for corporate gain. She had survived worse than this. She would survive it still, with her dignity intact. As midnight approached, Grace put away her sketchbook and checked on Noah, sleeping peacefully in his crib. She brushed a gentle finger across his cheek, this child who had been both her greatest challenge and her greatest strength. "For you," she whispered, "whatever comes, whatever it paras, I will build us a future worthy of you." Outside, snow continued to fall, transforming the world in silence, covering the old, making way for the new. Grace watched it for a long time, finding in its quiet persistence a reflection of her own journey. From darkness toward light, from isolation toward connection, from mere survival toward the possibility of truly living again. Grace paced the cottage living room, phone pressed to her ear, heart pounding as she waited for Michael's voice. She had tried to focus on her work all morning, but her thoughts kept returning to the boardroom in New York where Michael's professional fate was being decided. Noah played contentedly on his blanket, unaware of the tension in his mother's body, the way her eyes kept darting to the clock, to the driveway, to her silent phone. When it finally rang, Michael's name appearing on the screen, Grace nearly dropped it in her haste to answer. "Michael?" Her voice betrayed her anxiety. "What happened?" The line was silent for a moment that stretched into eternity. Then Michael's voice came through, strained but steady. "They voted against Reynolds' offer. 7-5. We keep control of the company." Relief flooded through Grace, so powerful it made her knees weak. She sank onto the couch. "Thank God," she breathed. "Michael, that's wonderful news." His laugh was tired but genuine. "It was close, too close. But we won this round. Reynolds isn't giving up, but we've bought time, strengthened our position." "When will you be home?" Grace asked, then caught herself, suddenly aware of the domesticity of the question, of the assumption behind it. Michael's voice softened. "I like hearing you call it that. Home. I should be back by dinner. There's paperwork, statements to the press. But Grace, I can't wait to see you, to see both of you." The simple admission, the open affection in his voice, made Grace's heart swell. "We'll be here," she promised. After hanging up, Grace returned to the kitchen where Mrs. Hill and Kelly were preparing cookies, a smile she couldn't suppress brightening her face. "Good news?" Mrs. Hill inquired, her tone casual but her eyes sharp with interest. Grace nodded. "The board voted to keep the company. They rejected Reynolds' offer." Something that might have been a smile touched Mrs. Hill's lips. "Well, that is good news indeed." Kelly looked up from her cookie cutting, flour dusting her cheeks. "Does that mean Daddy's coming home?" "Yes, sweetheart," Grace replied, her heart warming at the joy that spread across the little girl's face. "He'll be home for dinner." The afternoon passed in a flurry of activity, finishing the cookies, tidying the cottage, helping Kelly create a welcome home sign for her father. Grace found herself humming as she moved about the space, caught occasionally by Mrs. Hill's knowing gaze. Later, as Mrs. Hill prepared to take Kelly back to the main house to change for dinner, she paused at the cottage door. "Ms. Miller," she began, her usual formality firmly in place. "I feel I should apologize for my initial reservations about your presence here." Grace looked up in surprise. "There's no need, Mrs. Hill. Your concern for the Carters was completely understandable." The older woman's expression softened slightly. "Perhaps, but I failed to see what Mr. Carter saw immediately. Your character, your dignity, despite circumstances, your devotion to your child. These are qualities I should have recognized sooner." Grace felt a surprising warmth at the woman's words, at the hard-won approval they represented. "Thank you, Mrs. Hill. That means a great deal coming from you." The housekeeper nodded once, a gesture that somehow conveyed both acknowledgement and a certain reserved affection. "Mr. Carter said he would be dining at the cottage this evening. I've taken the liberty of preparing something special. It should be delivered shortly." Grace smiled, touched by the thoughtfulness. "That's very kind. Thank you." After they left, Grace moved through the cottage with renewed energy, tidying the kitchen, freshening up, changing Noah into his cutest outfit. Her actions felt significant somehow, as if she were preparing not just for dinner, but for the beginning of something new, something important. When Michael arrived bearing a bottle of champagne and a small gift bag, the smile that lit his face at the sight of her made Grace's breath catch. This was not the smile of a man offering charity or even friendship. This was the smile of a man coming home to someone he loved. Dinner was a quiet celebration. The meal Mrs. Hill had sent over proving to be Michael's favorites, the champagne open to toast the board's decision, the conversation flowing easily between them. Noah sat in his high chair, occasionally babbling as if adding his own commentary, making them both laugh. "Jason tells me your designs for the gala have been unanimously approved," Michael said as they finished their meal. The event planner called them inspired and perfectly aligned with the foundation's mission. Grace felt a flush of pride. "It's a meaningful theme, new beginnings. It resonated with me." Michael's eyes held hers across the table. "With me too, more than ever." After the meal, as they settled on the couch before the fire, Noah sleeping peacefully in his portable crib nearby, Michael handed Grace the small gift bag he had brought. "What's this?" she asked, surprised. "Open it and see." Inside, Grace found a small velvet box. Her heart hammered as she opened it, revealing not jewelry as she had half expected, but a key. She looked up questioningly. Michael smiled, a hint of nervousness in his expression. "It's a key to a storefront in Greenwich Village. Commercial space, excellent natural light, recently renovated. Well, it could be a gallery, your gallery." Grace stared at him, stunned. "Michael, I can't accept this. It's too much." He shook his head. "It's not a gift, Grace. It's an investment in your talent, in your future. The space is leased for a year under the name Miller Fine Arts. What you do with it is entirely up to you." Grace ran her finger over the key, emotion rising in her throat. "Why?" she asked finally. Michael's expression grew serious. "Because I believe in you. Because your art deserves to be seen. Because I want Noah to grow up seeing his mother achieve her dreams, not just survive." He paused, gathering his thoughts. "You once told me that single mothers without degrees or portfolios aren't in high demand in the art world. I want to challenge that assumption. Your work speaks for itself. The gala designs prove that. This space gives you the opportunity to let more people hear what it's saying." Grace looked down at the key in her palm, its weight both terrifying and thrilling. This wasn't charity, it was opportunity. A chance to reclaim the path she'd been forced to abandon, to become more than just a survivor. "I don't know what to say," she whispered. Michael reached across the space between them, his hand covering hers, warm and steady. "You don't need to say anything now. The lease doesn't start until March. You have time to think, to plan, to decide what you want." Grace nodded, closing her fingers around the key. "Thank you for believing in me when I'd stopped believing in myself." Michael's smile was gentle. We all need someone to remind us of who we are beneath the circumstances life throws at us. You've done that for me too, Grace. More than you know. The days leading to the gala passed in a whirlwind of activity. With the board vote behind him, Michael's focus shifted to strengthening Carter investments against any future takeover attempts and preparing for the foundation's annual gala. Grace threw herself into finalizing the event designs, working closely with the event planners to ensure every detail reflected the New Beginnings theme. Their evenings were spent together at the estate, sometimes at the cottage, sometimes at the main house, the boundaries between the spaces growing less defined with each passing day. Kelly thrived in the expanding family unit, her attachment to both Grace and Noah deepening, her laughter filling the rooms that had once echoed with silence after her mother's death. Grace found herself settling into a rhythm she'd never expected. Professional satisfaction in her work, joy in the daily interactions with Kelly, peace in the growing closeness with Michael. The key to the gallery space remained in her bedside drawer, a promise she took out sometimes at night, turning it over in her fingers, imagining possibilities. A week before the gala, Michael approached Grace with a small velvet pouch. "The foundation board has a tradition," he explained, handing her the pouch. "The designer of the gala materials receives a special gift, a token of appreciation for capturing the spirit of the year's theme." Grace opened the pouch, tipping its contents into her palm. A delicate silver necklace emerged, a simple pendant of a rising sun, its rays extending outward in elegant lines. "It's beautiful," she whispered. "New beginnings," Michael said softly, "the dawn after darkness." It seemed fitting. His fingers brushed hers as he took the necklace, moving behind her to fasten it around her neck. Grace felt the warm weight of the pendant settle against her skin, just above her heart. "Perfect," Michael murmured, his hands lingering gently on her shoulders. Grace turned to face him, the emotions of the past weeks crystallizing into certainty. "Michael," she began, "after the gala, after our month here is officially over, what happens then? With us?" His expression grew serious, vulnerable in a way that made her heart ache. "What do you want to happen, Grace?" She took a deep breath, gathering her courage. "I want to stop pretending this is temporary. I want Kelly and Noah to have the family they both deserve. I want—" She hesitated, then pushed forward. "I want us to build something real together. Something lasting." Michael's eyes never left hers, his voice steady but tinged with emotion. "I've wanted that since the night I saw you stand up to Reynolds. Maybe even before, but I needed to be sure you weren't choosing this out of gratitude or necessity. That you were choosing me, because it's what you truly want." Grace stepped closer, her hand rising to touch his face. "I am choosing. With clear eyes and an open heart. I'm choosing you, Michael Carter." His arms encircled her, drawing her against him with gentle certainty. "And I choose you, Grace Miller. I think I've been choosing you since that Christmas Eve at the bus stop." When their lips met, it felt like coming home. Not to a place, but to a person. To the knowledge that whatever paths lay ahead, they would walk them together. The night of the gala arrived crisp and clear, stars brilliant in the winter sky. Grace stood in the guest bedroom of the main house. No longer a guest room, but hers now, filled with her clothes, her sketches, Noah's toys, staring at her reflection in the full-length mirror. The woman who looked back at her was almost unrecognizable from the one who had huddled on a bench 2 months ago. She wore a midnight blue gown that Michael had insisted on having custom made, her blonde hair styled in elegant waves, the silver sun pendant catching the light at her throat. But the most striking transformation was in her eyes. No longer haunted by fear and deprivation, they now held hope, purpose, joy. A soft knock came at the door. Mrs. Hill entered, her expression softening at the sight of Grace. "You look beautiful, my dear," the older woman said, abandoning her usual formality. "Mr. Carter asked me to give you this." She held out a slim jewelry box. Inside, Grace found another necklace. This one a simple silver star on a delicate chain. "It was Sarah's, Mrs. Boz," Hill explained gently. "She wore it to every foundation event. Mr. Carter thought she would want you to have it now." Grace touched the star with trembling fingers, overwhelmed by the significance of the gesture. Michael wasn't asking her to replace Sarah, to erase his past. He was honoring what had been while embracing what could be, a continuation rather than a replacement. Mrs. Hill, Grace said softly, would it be inappropriate to wear both, the sun and the star? The older woman's eyes glistened suspiciously. I think it would be perfect. The sun for your new beginning, the star for the light that guided you here. Mrs. Hill helped Grace remove the sun pendant, then fastened the star around her neck. Once it was secure, she reattached the sun on a shorter chain so that both pendants lay against Grace's skin, complementing rather than competing. There, the housekeeper said, her voice rougher than usual. Perfect. Downstairs, Michael waited in the foyer, handsome in his tuxedo, his expression transforming to one of wonder as Grace descended the stairs. His eyes moved from her face to the pendants at her throat, understanding dawning in his gaze. You are breathtaking, he said simply when she reached him. Grace touched the star, then the sun. Thank you for this, for everything. Michael took her hand, raising it to his lips. Tonight is about new beginnings, he said, about honoring the past while embracing the future. Kelly, stunning in a child-sized gown of pale pink, bounced excitedly nearby. Noah was already asleep upstairs under Mrs. Hill's watchful care. The foundation gala was no place for an infant, but Michael had promised a special family celebration the next day, the official end of Grace's month at the cottage, the beginning of their life together. The drive to New York passed quickly, filled with Kelly's excited chatter about the party, about seeing her father's colleagues, about staying up super late like a grown-up. Grace watched the passing scenery, the city lights growing brighter as they approached, reflecting on how much had changed since she had last seen the skyline. The gala venue was magnificent, a historic ballroom transformed by twinkling lights, flowers, and the design elements Grace had created. Her work was everywhere, the New Beginnings logo she had designed adorning programs, projections, table settings. The sight of it, of her vision realized on such a scale, filled her with pride. Michael kept her close as they entered, his hand warm at the small of her back. Heads turned, whispers followed, but Grace held her head high. She was not ashamed of their story, of how they had found each other, of the love that had grown between them. The evening unfolded in a series of introductions, conversations, moments of beauty. Michael's colleagues were polite if curious, the foundation board members warm and welcoming. Grace found herself genuinely enjoying the gala, appreciating the opportunity to see the charitable work Michael had built, to understand this part of his life. As they circulated among the guests, Michael was called away briefly to speak with a major donor. Grace stood near one of her design displays, admiring how the lighting enhanced the imagery, when a familiar voice spoke behind her. Well, if it isn't the Christmas miracle herself. Grace turned to find Victor Reynolds watching her, champagne glass in hand, his expression coldly amused. Mr. Reynolds, she acknowledged, keeping her voice steady. I'm surprised to see you here. His smile didn't reach his eyes. I make a point of keeping my enemies close, Miss Miller. Besides, I wouldn't miss the debut of Michael Carter's latest acquisition. Grace felt anger rise within her, but kept her expression neutral. Is that how you see relationships, Mr. Reynolds? As acquisitions? As business transactions? That explains a great deal about your tactics. Reynolds' smile faltered slightly. You think you know me based on business decisions? On strategies to maximize profit? I know you see people as means to ends, Grace replied calmly, as tools to be used rather than individuals to be respected. I know you offered me a position not because you valued my skills, but because you thought it would hurt Michael. That tells me everything I need to know about your character. Reynolds studied her, something like surprise flickering in his eyes. You're more perceptive than I gave you credit for, Ms. Miller. But you're naive if you think what you and Michael have is anything but temporary. Men like him don't marry women they find on street corners. Grace felt the barb hit its mark, old insecurities stirring. But she pushed them aside, finding strength in what she knew to be true. Men like Michael, she said quietly, see beyond circumstances to character, beyond appearances to essence. That's why he'll always be a better man than you, Mr. Reynolds. and why he'll always win against you in the long run. Before Reynolds could respond, Michael appeared at Grace's side, his expression darkening as he recognized the other man. "Reynolds," he said coldly, "I don't recall seeing your name on the guest list." Reynolds smiled thinly. "Consider it a gesture of goodwill, Michael. I wanted to personally congratulate you on the board's decision. This round, at least." Michael's arms slipped around Grace's waist, a gesture both protective and possessive. "There won't be another round, Victor. The shareholders have been fully briefed on your tactics, on what your takeover would mean for the company, for the foundation. You've lost this fight." Reynolds' expression hardened. "We'll see," he said simply, then turned to Grace. "It was educational meeting you properly, Ms. Miller. I suspect we'll cross paths again." As he walked away, Grace felt tension she hadn't realized she was holding, released from her shoulders. "Are you okay?" Michael asked softly. "What did he say to you?" Grace shook her head. "Nothing important, nothing true." Michael studied her face, concern in his eyes. "Grace, if he threatened you, if he said anything—" She placed a finger gently on his lips, stopping his words. "He tried to make me doubt you. Doubt us. He failed." The worry in Michael's expression melted into something warmer, deeper. "Reynolds believes everyone has a price, that everything is transactional," Michael said quietly. "He can't comprehend relationships built on something other than advantage. I almost pity him." Grace leaned into Michael's embrace, drawing strength from his steadiness. "It's a cold way to live," she agreed. "Never trusting, never connecting, always calculating." Michael's arm tightened around her waist. "I have something I want to share with you," he said, guiding her toward a quieter corner of the ballroom. "Something I've been thinking about since the board vote." Curious, Grace followed him to a small alcove where the sounds of the gala were muffled, creating a bubble of privacy amid the crowd. "What is it?" Mighty Nundy asked. Michael took both her hands in his expression serious but tinged with excitement. "I'm restructuring Carter Investments, creating a new division focused on art investment and promotion, discovering new talent, supporting emerging artists, creating galleries in underserved communities. The board approved it yesterday." Grace's eyes widened. "Michael, that's wonderful, but why are you telling me like this, like it's a secret?" His smile was warm, slightly nervous. "Because I want you to run it, Grace, to be its director. Your gallery would be the flagship, but you'd be responsible for the entire division, mentoring other artists, creating opportunities, building something meaningful." Grace felt the air leave her lungs. This wasn't just a gallery space. This was a career, a purpose, a chance to help others who had been overlooked or abandoned by traditional art institutions. I, I don't have the experience," she stammered to him. "The credentials." "You have the talent," Michael interrupted gently. "The vision, the understanding of what it means to be excluded, to have doors closed. Who better to open those doors for others?" Grace's mind raced, possibility unfurling before her, not just her own success, but the chance to lift others, to create pathways where none had existed. "You believe I could do this?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Michael's gaze was steady, certain. "I know you can. I've seen how you think, how you create, how you empathize. This isn't charity, Grace. It's recognition of what you bring to the table. It's me seeing you, all of you, not just your circumstances." Grace felt tears threatening, the magnitude of his faith in her overwhelming. "I don't know what to say," she whispered. Michael's hands tightened around hers. "Say you'll consider it. That's all I ask for now." Before she could respond, the foundation director approached, informing Michael that it was time for his annual address. With a gentle squeeze of her hands and a promise to continue their conversation later, he followed the director to the stage. Grace watched him go, her heart and mind full, the possibilities he'd laid before her both exhilarating and terrifying. A gallery of her own was one thing. This was a responsibility, a platform, a chance to reshape an industry that had excluded people like her. As the lights dimmed and attention turned to the stage, Grace found herself holding her breath, caught in a moment that felt like standing on the edge of an entirely new life. Michael stood before the crowd, his presence commanding attention without effort. The foundation's director had introduced him with glowing praise, speaking of the year's accomplishments, of lives changed, of hope restored. Now Michael stepped forward, his gaze finding Grace in the audience before addressing the assembled guests. This year's theme, New Beginnings, is deeply personal to me, he began, his voice carrying clearly through the hushed room. 2 months ago, on Christmas Eve, my daughter Kelly and I encountered a young woman and her infant son at a bus stop. They had nowhere to go, no one to turn to. What happened next changed all our lives. Grace felt every eye in the room turned to her, but she held her head high, unashamed of her past, proud of her journey. That night taught me that new beginnings often come disguised as endings, Michael continued. That hope can be found in the darkest moments. That family isn't always defined by blood, but by love, by choice, by the courage to open your heart again. He turned to Grace, his gaze holding hers across the crowded room. Grace Miller taught me that. She and her son Noah showed me that loss doesn't have to be the end of the story, that second chances are possible, that love can bloom in the most unexpected circumstances. His words touched something deep within Grace, validation not just of their relationship, but of her worth, of her journey, of everything she had endured to reach this moment. The foundation exists to create new beginnings for those who need them most, Michael concluded, to offer not just assistance, but dignity, not just resources, but respect, not just charity, but genuine opportunity. That mission has never felt more meaningful to me than it does tonight. The applause that followed was thunderous, but Grace barely heard it. Her focus remained on Michael, on his eyes finding hers across the room, on the love reflected there. The remainder of the gala passed in a blur of emotions, dancing in Michael's arms, accepting congratulations on her designs, fielding curious but mostly kind questions about their unusual meeting. Through it all, Michael remained by her side, his presence steady, his hand often finding hers as if he couldn't bear not to touch her, not to reassure himself of her presence. As midnight approached, they slipped away from the celebration, Kelly sleepy between them as they made their way to the waiting car. The little girl fell asleep almost instantly as they began the drive back to the city, her head resting against Grace's arm, one small hand still clutching her fancy party favor. "She adores you," Michael said softly, glancing at his daughter. "You've brought something back to her life that I couldn't provide alone." Grace brushed a gentle hand over Kelly's curls. "She makes it easy to love her." Michael's eyes met hers in the dim car interior. "And me? Do I make it easy?" The vulnerability in his question made Grace's heart swell. "No," she answered honestly. "Loving you is terrifying, because it matters so much, because losing it would hurt too deeply." "And yet," he prompted, "and yet I do. Love you with everything I am." His hand found hers in the darkness, fingers intertwining. "I love you too, Grace Miller. I think I have since that night on the bench, though I didn't recognize it then." The city lights reflected in the car windows, painting patterns across their joined hands. In the back seat, Kelly slept peacefully, untroubled by the adult's quiet declarations, by the weight of the moment unfolding around her. "What happens now?" Grace asked softly. "Tomorrow is officially the end of my month at the cottage." Michael's smile was gentle, certain. "Tomorrow is the beginning of the rest of our lives together, if that's what you want." "It is," she whispered, "more than anything." They arrived at the penthouse, Michael carrying Kelly inside while Grace followed. After settling the sleeping child in her room, they found themselves drawn to the balcony, despite the cold. Snow had begun to fall, gentle flakes drifting in the night air, settling on the city below. Michael stood beside Grace, watching the snow, his expression thoughtful. "I had planned to do this at the cottage tomorrow," he said finally, "to bring everything full circle, but I don't want to wait any longer." He reached into his pocket and withdrew a small velvet box. Grace's breath caught as he opened it to reveal a ring. Elegant, vintage, a sapphire surrounded by diamonds that caught the light like captured stars. "This was my grandmother's," Michael explained, his voice steady despite the emotion in his eyes. "Sarah never wore it. She had her own engagement ring. I think it was waiting for you, Grace, for this moment." He knelt before her, snow gathering on his shoulders, his gaze never leaving hers. "Grace Miller," he began, "you came into my life when I thought the best parts of me had died with Sarah. You showed me that the heart can heal, that love can grow and again, that family can be found in the most unexpected places. You and Noah have brought light back into our lives, mine and Kelly's. Will you marry me, Grace? Will you make our family complete? Grace looked down at this man, this good, kind, honorable man who had seen her at her lowest and recognized her worth, who had offered help without diminishment, love without conditions. Yes, she whispered, tears of joy gathering in her eyes. Yes, Michael, with all my heart, yes. He slipped the ring onto her finger, then rose to gather her in his arms, his kiss a promise of all that was to come, a life together, a family united, a love born from compassion and grown into something deep and lasting. As they held each other beneath the falling snow, Grace thought of the long journey that had brought her here, from desperation to hope, from survival to joy, from isolation to belonging. She thought of Noah, who would grow up knowing a father's love, a sister's devotion, a home's security. She thought of Kelly, who had found in Grace the mother she had lost too young. She thought of Michael, who had risked his heart again, despite his grief, who had seen in her not a charity case, but a partner, an equal, a love worth fighting for. The months that followed brought changes both profound and ordinary. Grace and Noah moved permanently into the main house, though they kept the cottage as a weekend retreat and art studio. The gallery opened in Greenwich Village under the name Miller New Beginnings, showcasing not only Grace's work, but that of other artists who had overcome significant barriers. The new division of Carter Investments quickly gained recognition for its innovative approach to art investment and community engagement. Victor Reynolds' attempts to undermine Carter Investments continued, but with diminishing effectiveness. The board remained firmly behind Michael, impressed by both his business acumen and his commitment to ethical practices. Eventually, Reynolds turned his attention to easier targets, his defeat at Michael's hands becoming a footnote in the business press. The wedding was planned for spring, a small ceremony on the Connecticut estate. Grace found herself absorbed in preparations, in building her gallery, in the daily joys of their expanding family. Noah took his first steps in the penthouse living room, Kelly lost her first tooth, and life moved forward with a rhythm that felt both miraculous and utterly natural. Christmas Eve arrived again, exactly 1 year since the night at the bus stop. Michael suggested they take a drive into the city, just the two of them, while Mrs. Hill watched the children. Grace understood immediately where they were going, her heart full as they approached the quiet bus stop near Rockefeller Center. The bench was empty now, dusted with fresh snow, the bus route sign flickering above it just as it had that night. Michael took Grace's hand as they stood looking at it, both lost in memories of how their story had begun. I almost kept walking, Michael admitted quietly. If Kelly hadn't insisted, Grace squeezed his hand, but she did, and you listened, and here we are. They stood in silence for a moment, snow falling gently around them, the sounds of the city muffled by winter. I want to do something, Michael said suddenly. A tradition, maybe, to remember. He explained his idea, establishing a program through the foundation to provide emergency housing on Christmas Eve for homeless families, ensuring no one would spend the holiday as Grace and Noah had a year ago. Each family would receive not just shelter, but opportunities, education, job training, childcare, whatever they needed to rebuild. We'll call it the Bench Project, he suggested, a reminder that sometimes the most important journeys begin in the most unexpected places. Grace felt tears gather, the generosity of his vision touching her deeply. It's perfect, she whispered, a way to transform what happened to us into hope for others. They returned to Connecticut that evening to find the house aglow with lights, Kelly and Noah waiting excitedly with Mrs. Hill. The children had spent the afternoon making snow angels in the yard, and Kelly insisted on showing their creations before dinner. Hand in hand, the family walked through the snowy grounds to a clearing where 4 perfect snow angels lay side by side, too large, too small, their wings touching to form a connected whole. Look, Kelly exclaimed proudly, it's all of us. Michael lifted Noah onto his shoulders, the toddler's delighted laughter ringing in the crisp air. Grace watched them, this family that had formed against all odds, this love that had grown from a single act of compassion. Christmas morning dawned clear and bright. The Connecticut estate glowed with holiday decorations, with warmth, with the unmistakable aura of joy. In the main house living room, before the towering Christmas tree, the family gathered, Michael and Grace, Noah toddling now with tentative steps, Kelly bouncing with excitement as she distributed gifts. Then Hill moved quietly among them, her usual reserve softened by genuine affection, by her acceptance of the family that had formed before her eyes. Grace wore a simple cream sweater, her engagement ring catching the light with every movement, her hair loose around her shoulders. She sat beside Michael on the couch, watching as Kelly helped Noah unwrap a colorful toy, the children's laughter filling the space with music more beautiful than any Christmas carol. "What a difference a year makes," Michael murmured, his arm around her shoulders, his eyes full of wonder. Grace leaned into him, gratitude overwhelming her for a moment. "From that bench to this moment," she agreed softly. "Sometimes I still can't believe it." "Believe it," Michael replied, pressing a kiss to her temple. "This is real, Grace. This is home. This is forever." Later that day, as snow began to fall again, soft and gentle in the gathering dusk, the family bundled up to venture outside. Kelly insisted they build another snow family, bigger and better than before. Noah, secure in Michael's arms, watched with wide-eyed wonder as the figures took shape beneath Grace's artistic guidance. When they finished, they stood back to admire their creation. 4 snow figures of varying sizes, standing together against the winter landscape, united by the sticks that formed their connected hands. "Look," Kelly said proudly, "it's us, forever and ever." Grace looked at the child who had become a daughter to her, at the baby who had grown into a toddler, at the man who had become her partner, her love, her future, and she knew that Kelly was right. "Forever and ever," she echoed softly, her voice carrying in the winter stillness. As twilight deepened, as Christmas lights began to twinkle against the darkening sky, Grace Miller stood surrounded by the family she had found in the most unexpected place, at the most desperate moment. And she knew with absolute certainty that she was exactly where she was meant to be. Home at last, loved at last, complete at last. Sometimes the most beautiful beginnings come disguised as endings. Sometimes the coldest nights lead to the warmest dawns. Sometimes a single act of kindness can build an entire world. And sometimes, just sometimes, fairy tales come true. Not in the way we expect, but in the way we most need them to.